I'm Bridget Parrish, Auditor General of BC. Thanks for joining me. The Office of the Auditor General acknowledges that we live and work with gratitude and respect on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge that our office is situated on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen people of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. Our examination report on the Lytton wildfire recovery was tabled in the House this morning. The wildfire that swept through the village of Lytton on June 30th, 2021, claimed 2 lives and left extensive damage to homes, buildings, and the environment. 90% of the village's homes and buildings were destroyed, and more than 40 structures were lost in Lytton First Nation communities located immediately next to the village. It has been a long and challenging recovery since the fire that left behind widespread contaminated debris. The essentials of community life, groceries, postal services, health, and education services were all gone, and an entire community was displaced. So what was our role at the Office of the Auditor General? We began our examination after members of the public and MLAs voiced concerns about the time and money it was taking to rebuild the village of Lytton. We examined one important aspect of the recovery effort, the role of the provincial government, led by the Ministry of Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. As you go through our report, you'll see that the province faced 3 main challenges to supporting and funding the village's recovery. We have also provided a timeline and breakdown of the province's funding commitments. We summarized the new Emergency and Disaster Management Act as it applies to disaster recovery in small municipalities. And we list actions for the province to consider when it forms policies and guidance under its new emergency management framework. Let's start by looking at the 3 big challenges that the province encountered. First, the situation in the village of Lytton was complex and unprecedented in BC. Nearly the entire community was destroyed. The province's legislation and policy was not sufficient to support recovery on that scale. For example, it relied on funding programs that the village could not effectively leverage. It also followed an approach that expected communities to lead their own recovery regardless of capacity. The village of Lytton itself didn't have the administrative capacity or financial resources to organize and fund its recovery. This mattered because the recovery work was very complex, including environmental remediation and archaeological work. Most residents either didn't have fire insurance or were underinsured, which meant they couldn't fund the necessary work on their properties and start rebuilding. The province's second challenge concerned partnerships with Indigenous governing bodies. The Nk'Klatma have Aboriginal title and rights in their territory, which includes the site where the village of Lytton was built. This meant the province needed to ensure the Nk'Klatma were partners in the recovery in the territory, which included the village. But while we saw early attempts by the province and key Nk'Klatma governing bodies to collaborate with the village, this did not ultimately result in collaborative partnership. This was a missed opportunity to advance reconciliation and for the village to benefit from sharing the recovery work with its neighbors, the Lytton First Nation. The third challenge concerned the province's oversight of funding it provided to the village of Lytton. The province committed more than $60 million for the recovery provided through funding agreements with the village. At first, the province dispersed the funds in lump sum payments. It expected the village to provide financial reporting on how the funds were used, but the village did not submit all required reports for 2022 and 2023. This lack of reporting meant that the province could not say with certainty how provincial funds were spent during that period. In 2024, the province implemented a new funding agreement that required the village to submit receipts to receive reimbursement. As for provincial legislation, our report notes that the province brought in the Emergency Disaster Management Act in 2023. The Act includes provisions that apply to disaster recovery in small communities like the village of Lytton. It creates a way for local governments to form collaborative emergency management organizations with Indigenous governing bodies and the province, rather than attempt to lead a recovery on their own. The Act also recognizes Indigenous governing bodies' role in emergency management, and it includes options for agreements with the province. Our report includes several areas for the province to consider as it puts in place new policies and guidelines for emergency and disaster management. Those considerations include anticipating disaster recovery in communities with low cash reserves, enhancing oversight of provincially funded recovery work, ensuring local communities have support to implement the new Act's requirements, and developing a framework for assessing the capacity of local authorities to lead recovery efforts. In closing, I'd like to express my deepest sympathies to those who have and continue to be impacted by the trauma and upheaval that the Lytton Creek wildfire brought. And I'll be happy to take your questions now.
Thank you, Auditor General. We are going to begin today's Q&A portion. Media on the phone line, you can book up to queue a question by pressing *1. And for media in the room, please raise your hand and someone will reach you with a microphone. We ask that you limit your questions to one question and one follow-up, and you may queue up later for additional questions. We'll start in the room. Please introduce yourself and your outlet.
Hi there, Katie DeRosa from CBC News. The Premier was asked about this morning, and he says that we've passed a new law that requires the conversations between communities and First Nations to happen in advance of an emergency. Based on what you found in this report, is this legislation good enough to respond to the challenges you identified?
Well, thank you for the question. So we haven't examined the new legislation, but we have seen the changes in the new legislation, and we have made some considerations for them going forward in how they implement. And so finding some policies and putting in place some frameworks for assisting in deciding how to help those communities when another disaster like this occurs. And I say when because it's probably a matter of when as opposed to if. So, but thank you. Do you have a follow-up?
Yes, please. There's also been concerns from some residents on the outskirts of the village in the rural area that they felt like there was like a have and have not situation, that they didn't get as good of support from the province if they were on the outskirts. Did that come up at all in your report? And what do you say to those residents who feel like they didn't get enough provincial support?
Oh yeah, that's very sad. And I say I'm sorry to them. But our examination was focused on the village itself because that is where the majority of the funding was going from the province. And we were examining the province's role in supporting the village. So that was the focus of this examination. But thank you for your questions.
Yeah, Jeremy Hainsworth with BC Today. Just talking about that one particular piece of legislation, one of the other pieces of legislation that came up in the report was DRIPA. And I'm wondering, given that there are changes coming to the previous piece of legislation that was discussed, we've got amendments to DRIPA coming at some point. From your examination in this situation vis-a-vis cooperation between local authorities and First Nations, are there any suggestions that your office has towards amendments towards DRIPA to facilitate future action?
No, certainly not. We would never make that sort of a recommendation because we don't question the merits of government's policies. We examine how those policies are implemented and whether they're achieving their objectives when they are. So that would be outside of our role and our mandate. But I appreciate the question nonetheless. Do you have follow-up? Okay, thank you.
And we'll go to the phone lines now. Alec Lazenby, go ahead.
Hi, Auditor. Just wondering if you have any recommendations for the province in terms of moving forward. I know you said the new act that they introduced allows for communities to work together and not have to go it alone. But in terms of your examination, are there other areas where you feel like the province has not addressed the concerns raised by the study of the circumstances in the Lytton recovery?
No, I think that the examination is really just a factual report of what we found and explains some of the challenges because they were very complex, and I think there was potentially the opportunity for people to oversimplify some of the challenges that were being faced. And so we can see through that examination, the change in the legislation and the attempt to correct some of the challenges or address some of the challenges going forward. We do provide some considerations on the implementation of the new legislation and how it's rolled out. But we don't go beyond that to provide any further recommendations in this report. Did you have a follow-up?
Yes. In terms of a follow-up, I noticed that the report only dates up to March 2025. Why not include, time periods past that? We're now in March 2026. there's an entire year there that has not been accounted for in this report.
Yeah, we sort of, you have to decide when you're going to stop the period of the examination because it could go on and on. So choosing at March 2025 was when most of the remediation work had been completed and the building permits had been issued. So we could see that that piece of it had been completed, and recognizing that we'd want to get this report out because we can see that there's a lot of learning to come from this, and we hope that it results in improvements going forward. So just have to make a decision at some point, and went with that one given the amount of recovery that had been done at that point.
And we'll stay on the phone lines. Tyler Olson, Tai, please go ahead.
Thank you. I've heard from some concern from residents that the report may have been overly kind to the provincial response, given the lack of rebuilding that has occurred over the last 5 years. Your report highlights challenges the province faced, but what would you say to somebody who might suggest that the province itself, whether actively or by neglect, created considerable challenges, and that the report doesn't fully tackle those?
Well, I think the report is a fairly accurate representation of the facts of what occurred, and highlights the challenges in a way that you can see the layers of complexity that were involved. Certainly explains that the province did have interim legislation at the time that, they were working with what they had, and we can see that they have changed the legislation over that period of time, and that they brought in new measures. So I'm not sure what those other deficiencies people are referring to that weren't covered, but I'll leave it at that. I think that's what we've reported.
Sure. Why does the report not get into the specifics about how the money allocated by the province was used and whether it benefited residents? I know you write that there was reporting deficiencies, but was there any, examination of the specific use of the money when the reporting was available?
No, just because the information wasn't complete. There wasn't complete information about how the funds were spent, which is basically what we reported. The province sent in someone to take a look at the books as well, and they were not able to substantiate a number of the contracts, figure out where the money was going. And so that we didn't expect to be able to find the information to be able to categorize what it was spent on. So the focus was really more on what were the other, obviously that's one of the big challenges was making sure that we know where the funding is going. And so we've pointed that out, but looking at some of the other challenges as well. And that sort of integrates with the first challenge being the capacity of the village to lead its own recovery. And that includes keeping the books, which would have been difficult.
And just a reminder for media on the phone line, you may queue up to ask a question by pressing *1. And if you'd like to arrange a phone or video interview with the Auditor General, please call 250-419-6117. We'll stay on the phone lines and go to Michelle Barrero with CTV. Go ahead, please.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. Speaking with the issue of the finances, did the report or did investigators uncover why the provincial money that was spent was not being reported during that 2-year period?
So it didn't look at why the money wasn't being reported. The reports did not come after a certain period. They stopped coming. And then it shows that the province did initiate an investigation into that to see if they could figure out what the money was spent on. But the records were just not there. So then that's what's reported in our report. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, okay. So just clarifying there then. So we don't know why the reports never kept coming to the province. were there any concerns raised when you guys were looking into this about how that money was spent?
Not so much. I think the focus was really on the different challenges and how they all interrelated. And with the funding, we had some reports that came from the village early on, and we do see a lot of turnover in the administration working in the village. So we can infer that there has been a lot of turnover of personnel, and somewhere in there the records have not been maintained, and that's why the province wasn't able to obtain detailed information about how the money was spent. But that same investigation indicated that they didn't believe that there was any bad faith there, and that everyone was attempting to operate in good faith, but that the records were just not easily maintained.
And we'll continue on the phone lines. Alphonsine Sifu with CBC, please go ahead.
Hi. So the Lytton Creek Wildfire did, in the report, it says that it did not distinguish between jurisdictions. It burned through a municipality and destroyed properties on 3 reserves and in the regional district. I've spoken with a representative of the district, and she reports that some people felt left behind, as mentioned before. But did the province have any role to play on their recovery? Some are disappointed that a line seemed to be traced between the village of Lytton and the rural area.
Yeah, a similar question to before, and our examination really did focus on the province's role in supporting the village of Lytton, because of the amount of funding that was going to the village, and also because it was sort of the main service hub for the area. And so that's why we didn't look at those outlying areas or other parts of the district. So I'm afraid I can't answer the question about what we didn't examine. Did you have a follow-up
My question was more. This question was more about if the province had any role to play in the recovery of the rural area.
We didn't examine the province in what it would have done for the other areas, but I do know they were coordinating funding in other areas, but it wasn't the focus of our examination. That would be a question probably for the province around what other work they did. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. My follow-up is, can you tell us about the impact of such a report on the province's ways? It's more for the public that would wonder what the impacts of the recommendations could bring in the long run.
Pardon me, could you just repeat that? What the report would...
So, yeah, like the impact on the province, what you believe the impact could be on the province in the long run, for the public to know generally what it can do.
Yeah, hopefully it helps highlight some of the challenges and provides the province with information that would support them in making improvements, so that if this ever happens again in another region, that they are able to do a really good job of supporting those local communities when they face another disaster. That would be the goal. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
And just a reminder for media on the line, you can queue up to ask a question by pressing *1, but we're going to go to a question in the room right now. Please go ahead.
Morning, it's been a while. Beto Haraburn, new at Global. Reading through your report, was there ever a time where you asked yourself why it took so long for the province to recognize that there was deficiencies? Because I think a lot of us who reported on it knew there were problems. And it seems like it took a long time for the province to actually figure out that there were problems, there were gaps in Lytton. Did that come up in it came up in your report, but how did you see it while you were doing it?
Not so much in terms of how long it took for them to recognize the issue. It was really a matter of navigating their own legislation and how they would be able to support the village given what they had to work with. So I think that was really more the focus on how they would integrate different pieces of legislation that they were responsible for administering, but recognizing they've got an interim framework in place, they've got policies that aren't quite aligned, and just trying to do their best, I think, is really what it was.
They were a bit hamstrung by their own policies, essentially, in this particular situation.
In this instance, because of the scale of the disaster, that was the real issue, was that it was such a large amount of destruction, and including the local government, like the complete rebuild of a local government is another element of complexity that would make it very difficult to navigate. So I hope that answers your question. Do you have a follow-up? No. Okay.
And we have no more questions in the queue. If you'd like to arrange a phone or video interview with the Auditor General, please call 250-419-6117 or email communications@bcauditor.com to book a time. And actually, we've got one late caller queuing up. Tyler Olson with the Tyee. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I thought earlier about I guess being it too. Yeah, I've spoken to a local councillor who had hoped this report would illustrate ways that the municipality could better serve the constituents. And she was a little disappointed it took this long for the report itself to come out. Why has it taken this long? And does that itself speak to some of the challenges in responding to a timely manner to the challenges being faced in Lytton?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was very complex, and gathering the evidence was extremely complex. We have multiple parties that we're dealing with, not straightforward at all for an examination, and lots of disparate information, and having to reconcile all of that to make sure that what we're reporting to you is factual and meets our standards. So and you may have also noticed a little bit of turnover in our office. So I'm new, and so that also can play a part in some of these things a little bit as well. So I hope that helps answer.
Tyler, did you have a follow-up on that?
I guess finally, what would you say to, what does maybe this report say to people in Lytton who are looking for some guidance or information that they can take away and say, okay, this is what we can do, or this is what our local government can do to help facilitate a speedier rebuild? Is there anything there that they can take away, you think?
Well, and I think if in these situations, the one of the big missed opportunities was the partnerships, finding partnerships that can support any community as they go through something like this is really important. And I think that's where we're seeing that new legislation does sort of enable that in a more direct way. So, and that would be something that maybe a local community wouldn't think to do, but is certainly something that is encouraged. It was encouraged in the previous iteration as well. Now it's got a little more ability to carry it out, I would say.
And now we have no further questions in the queue. You can visit oag.bc.ca for more information. I want to thank everyone for coming today. This concludes today's media availability from the Office of the Auditor General of BC.